The hotel room that prints receipts at 17 amperes. M. The first night, the receipt printer woke her. It coughed once in the dark, warmed its little brass roller, and began to spit out a strip of thermal paper that glowed faintly like a cigarette behind cupped hands. The room clock said 2:17 in pale blue digits. Vesper Klein lay very still in bed 5B at the Scissortail Hotel, a brick-walled midtown remnant on North Boston Avenue in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and listened to the tiny buzz and chirp as the machine printed, paused, and printed again, as if it were resuming a conversation it had been having without her for years. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? She had checked in late after a client dinner that went long on promises and light on dessert. The year was 2019, early November. The air outside clean after a narrow band of rain slid through, and the sidewalks shone like varnished stage floors. Vesper was 33, a freelance systems tech who patched networks for small hotels that couldn't afford to be down and couldn't afford to hire someone full-time. She traveled with a canvas tool roll, a spare router, a zippered pouch of adapters that looked like a magician's deck, and a mug with a hairline crack she liked to think of as its signature. The Scissortail was her kind of place. A lobby with a brass bell that had learned restraint, a front desk shelf of paperback mysteries for the taking, a night auditor who watched the door like a friend watches a house while you're out of town. He'd been the one to hand her the key card and the 2-page Wi-Fi map, Quill Penner, printed on a plastic badge, as if the name might be borrowed for the night. Night auditors aren't chatty by design, but Quill had leaned forward when she asked for the room farthest from the elevator. He'd said 5B is quiet most of the time, then paused, weighing whether to add something. He didn't. He pointed at the coffee station and said, "The cinnamon packets are the good ones." The printer sat on the desk under the window, small and stubborn, the kind of ticket machine you see in diners and old theaters. No USB cable trailed from it, which made Vesper grin in the dark because devices without visible leashes are both a challenge and a dare. The narrow receipt paper advanced in 2-inch bursts. The room smelled faintly of dust and citrus, the ghost of cleaning solution, and something else warm plastic maybe, or the metallic tang of heat on a coil. She slid out of bed, toes finding the rug, shoulders remembering every winter morning she had reached for her hoodie before her thoughts. The window showed a slice of downtown in sodium yellow, a parked truck with a tarp that breathed a little in the wind, a streetlight haloed just enough to be kind. She stood over the printer and watched it work. The top of the fresh strip read guest ledger at the margin, then a line of text that made her blink. Check-in, Harlan Row, rate $14.50, room 5B arrival, the 12th of October, 1958, comments, 2 pillows only. The paper was unbrowned, the font bold. She knew thermal stock fades to beige with sunlight, goes blotchy with time, and curls if you leave it near a vent. This looked new, but the data was from a year you had to say out loud to make it believable. The printer hummed again and produced another line. Check-in, Odetta Meyer. Rate, $12. Room, 5B. Arrival, the 4th of May, 1957. Comments, traveling with songbooks. She tore the strip and laid it flat on the desk, then pressed a finger to the cool plastic of the printer, as if touch might confess what the eye couldn't. The machine did not shake. It simply waited, polite as a clerk, with more to say. At 2:23, it stopped. A little green light near its only button winked twice like a made-up code. Vesper set the paper on a coaster, lay back down, and stared at the ceiling where the streetlight's slatted glow made a grid like a rehearsal. In 2 minutes, the heater clicked, the mini-fridge answered with its own throat clearing, and her body did the sensible thing it does when a problem cannot be solved and the hour is improper, it slept. Daylight always rationalizes the night. Vesper showered, dressed, and went downstairs with questions arranged in her mouth as if they were items on a parts list. Quill stood behind the desk with a pen balanced across his knuckles like a small seesaw. Room 5B printed receipts at 2:17, she said, like a person reporting a minor plumbing miracle. She slid the strip across. He read it, eyes moving left to right once, then again slower. He did not touch the paper, as if touching would make him complicit in whatever time wanted. He leaned in. You know how old buildings have old anchor points. You hang a new painting, but the wall still remembers the nail. He lowered his voice. That room was a manager's office back when this place was the Francis Motor Lodge. They kept the ledger in there, typed out receipts on a half-width machine bolted to the desk. At close, they printed a roll of check-ins for the night, tore it, and rubber banded the strip to the hardback ledger. Quill tapped the counter. Once, twice. I've heard the story since I was a kid, but the machine in that room was long gone when the Scissortail bought the building. That, he nodded toward the strip, is a thermal ticket printer from the last decade. We put it in to spit bar tabs during wedding weekends. He smiled without humor. The bar's downstairs. He told her what he knew, which was more than most people get for free before 10 in the morning. 2 nights a month, irregular but stubborn, the printer in 5B came alive at 2:17 and printed names from when the room was an office, and the office took cash, and the cash came with a handshake, and sometimes a song. Housekeeping had tried unplugging it, but the little machine held on to its paper and its green light like a dog holds a ball. Engineering had replaced it with a new unit. The new unit learned the trick too, as if the wire in the wall had a voice. Once, a manager put the printer in another room. It printed in the other room. At 2:17, Vesper asked the question an auditor would ask, "Why 2:17?" Quill lifted a shoulder. Night audit on the old system rolled at 2. The manager, a woman named Adelaine Merritt, he wrote in her diary, he gestured toward the wall where black and white photos of the old Francis hung in frames. The audit took 17 minutes most nights because the room charge calculation was slow. He winked, a habit to soften hard edges. That's what the Haunted History Tour says anyway. My grandmother worked housekeeping here in the 60s. She said Adelaine was the kind of woman who could silence a room by looking at a clock. Quill slid the strip back to Vesper. I don't put much stock in anything that prints on its own. But I don't stay in 5B either. She laughed, but softly. I'm the right kind of superstitious, she said. The kind that believes in loose cables and also in writing down names. She folded the strip, tucked it in her notebook, and promised the front desk a stronger signal on the north wing by supper. Work made the morning sensible. Vesper crawled into the equipment closet on 5, balanced her laptop on an inverted bucket, and watched packets move in tidy lines across her screen. The Scissortails network roamed like a polite guest slow if you needed it to be fast. Fast if you weren't asking. She pushed a firmware update, tuned channel widths, stood on a chair to re-angle a ceiling antenna the way you point your head to listen better. Lunch came from a food truck with a chalkboard menu and a line that made the air smell like cilantro and good intentions. She ate on the loading dock, the sun finding her cheekbones and telling her to stop worrying about things no one pays you to worry about. The second night, the printer coughed at 2:17 on the dot. The room's clock, which she had not trusted since it flashed 12:12 after she plugged her phone charger, matched her wristwatch exactly. The printed strip listed names, again, 5 this time, each with a rate that made the era plain. Miguel Corrado, Della and Sten Bay, Bellamy H. Cross, Traveling Sales, G. Whitlow. The comments field sometimes added a phrase that felt like a quotation. Traveling with songbooks, baby sleeps light, keep the radio low. She tore the strip and laid it beside the previous one. The heater ticked its approval. She sat cross-legged on the rug, laptop open, the printer's power cord draped across her thigh. If it's a room ghost, she murmured, it should ignore me. If it's a network ghost, I may as well listen. Her laptop saw the printer as a simple thing on the subnet, a networked ticket device with a default login and a queue history that should have been empty and wasn't. Vesper scrolled. A job log rolling back months logged exactly 2 entries each night with the flag source, Legacy. Someone had written a silly little module into the Scissortails aging property management system, a module that echoed old file structures for nostalgia tours during October. She'd seen that kind of thing done for fun. But this module contained descriptors she didn't recognize. Ledger spool, carriage return key, ribbon jam. These were words from a different machine. The audit program triggered at 2. The ghost queue called itself at 2:17. She checked where it pointed. The path wasn't a path, it was a device ID that didn't match any modern naming scheme. She pinged the device. No answer. She traced the MAC. The vendor code came back to a company that died before the internet had central registration. That made her skin feel too tight. In the morning, white coffee cups clacked, and the lobby television played low, the weather woman pointing at a band of storms where storms like to form. Vesper asked Quill if there were schematics for the old building. He pointed to the office behind the desk. Ground plan framed on the wall. Maybe useful. The hotel had been two buildings stitched at the seam. The Francis Motor Lodge on the east, a narrower annex that used to be a savings bank on the west, joined by a flyover corridor at 3 and a clumsy arch at 5. Room 5B sat where the old bank manager's office once had been, according to a penciled note at the edge of the plan. There, a scrawl, printer niche, in lighter pencil, spare line to basement. Quill warmed to the problem the way night auditors do when daylight invites them to be citizens. He called maintenance. A man named Orson arrived in a polo with his name stitched in blue and a toolbox that had its own opinions. Together, they moved the desk in 5B 6 inches and then 3 and exposed a painted-over conduit hole at the baseboard with a thumb-width chase running down into the wall. Orson whistled between his teeth. That's no Romex. That's armored cable from a generation that believed steel could keep time. He tapped the baseboard with the handle of his screwdriver. It answered with the hollow ring of an old closet. In the basement, they found the closet where the spare line went to not exactly die. The air was colder down there, humid the way the past is humid. A metal cabinet stood against the wall, padlocked, a gray panel humming like a neighbor practicing scales. Orson tested the lock with a pick he swore he hadn't lost. The door swung open. Inside, another little printer sat, twin to the one upstairs, its power indicator dark, its paper roll neat as a submitted term paper. A thin cable ran from a bracket down into a conduit box with 2 stories to tell. One was modern CAT cable, patched to the scissortails switch. The other looked like fabric-insulated wire on lead. Orson touched it with reverence and withdrew his hand. You shouldn't be alive, he murmured to the box. Then he turned to Vesper. Want me to pull the breaker for this room tonight at 2:15? See if it stops. She shook her head before she quite knew why. The motion felt rude. Let me listen once more, she said. Then, if it's a loop, we cut it. The third night, nothing is supposed to happen. Patterns prefer 3 as a way to make you distrust them. Vesper made tea in the room kettle with the cinnamon packet Quill had sworn by. She texted her brother a photo of the printer and a caption that read, Haunted Bar Bill. And he sent back the shrug emoji that meant, I love you, but weirdness is your brand. At 2:17, the printer began, but this time the sound rode a breath of air cold enough to raise her arm's small hairs. She stood close enough for the paper to curl against her knuckles and read each line as it arrived. Check-in. Adelaine Merritt. Rate. Comp. Room. 5B. Arrival. The 12th of October, 1958. Comments. Night audit. She reached for the strip and her fingers trembled, mildly, like a person handed the microphone at a small funeral. The machine whirred without printing for a count of 6, then resumed, the font just a touch lighter. Check-in. Quince Palmer. Rate $9.50. Room 309. Arrival the 12th of October, 1958. Comments, meeting at dawn. The room held its usual choir, fridge, heater, hallway, ice machine, 2 turns down, but behind it all she heard a soft clicking. Not printer, not clock. Keys. The slow press and release of typewriter keys. Somewhere not in the room and not far enough away. She froze, because freezing is a way of letting more senses work. Her body made itself a listening instrument. The keys whispered. Again, 3 strokes. Pause. 2. The printer spit a final line. End of ledger. Prepared by A. Merritt. Time, 2:17 amperes, M. Vesper did what the body asks. She sat on the bed with the strip in her lap and waited for her breath to level. It did. The heater ticked, the fridge purred, the typewriter stopped pretending, the sound folded itself up and slid under the door. She slept because being a person who works with systems means you've learned to stack your fear on a shelf when there's nothing urgent to do with it. Morning turned the printer into a device again. She took the strip down to the desk. Quill stared at the word comp and the name he had heard his grandmother say on summer porches when the heat wanted out of the day. He asked to borrow the strip to show his manager, a woman with the fast walk gait of someone who plans 2 days all the time. The manager's name was Letha Croft, and she looked at the strip like a problem that could be solved with a memo. She was polite and firm. "We have tours on Fridays for the people who want goosebumps," she said. "We prefer to keep the goosebumps from rewriting our Google reviews." Vesper smiled, a tight little smile that said, "I won't post, I don't do that work, I just want to know what the wire knows." Letha sighed. The scissor tail was a college internship that never ended for her. The building was her thesis. She pointed at the framed photo behind the desk. Adelaine Merritt, hair pinned like a decision, stood at a wooden desk the size of a Buick, hand on a ledger book, face turned to a camera that had learned to respect her. The caption read, "Francis Motor Lodge, C 1959, Night Manager." Letha lowered her voice. Family lore says Adelaine died at her desk in 2003 after the building had been empty 6 years because she refused to move a box when the bank wanted it. The family had the key to the back door from the old days. She snuck in sometimes to straighten things that did not require her. A neighbor saw her light. By the time anyone checked, the coffee had gone cold and she'd written the date on a yellow legal pad with a line under it, like an anchor. I don't know if the story is true. I do know names have a way of using rooms until you say them out loud and then they rest. That afternoon, Vesper sat on the floor of 5B with her laptop and a coil of patience. She sniffed the packets between server and printer and saw the little ghost job present a string of bytes at 2 minutes past 2, announce itself as ready at 2:16, and request the queue at 2:17 with a line that included a date spelled in words, not numbers. October 12. She set a capture to record it tonight. She did not know what she would do with the proof, but the act of capturing felt like putting a box around a wild thing without requesting its death. The fourth night, she did not sleep. At 2:16, the room gathered itself. At 2:17, the printer began. The first name landed like a quiet gavel, Harlan Rowe. Again, as if the ledger wanted to list the set that belonged with the date, as if the building had a playlist for that night and needed it to end correctly. The second name, Odetta Meyer. The third, Quince Palmer. The machine word, then it printed a line that wasn't a line she understood. Checkout, A. Merritt. Time, 2, 17 amperes. M. Balance, $0. Drawer, locked. The room changed temperature by a needle's width. The way a body registers changes a thermostat does not. The typewriter sound returned, louder, as if the keys had moved closer, as if someone had rolled the desk chair to the doorway. Vesper stood. The bathroom light made a rectangle on the carpet. She turned it off and let the room be only the room. In the dark, a kind of courtesy arrived. She spoke to the space like a person speaks to a skittish animal. "I hear you," she said softly. "I see what you print. If you're finishing something, finish. If you need a witness, I'm here." The keys worked once, gently. The printer fed a final inch and stopped. The heater clicked off, as if called on. The fridge made a small, delighted sound, the way fridges do when they extract a victory from physics. Vesper lay down slowly, like a person trying not to wake a toddler, and watched the window make a square on the wall. She did not sleep much. She did not feel punished by that. On Friday, Quill called his grandmother. She came in with a smile that wore 80 years as if they were a favorite cardigan. Her name was Thalia Penner. She had hands that did hair buns right the first time and eyes that counted change without looking. She stood in 5B and curtsied to the air, lightly, like a joke only the past finds funny. She pointed at the baseboard where the printer niche had been long before this printer knew it was one. And she told a story the way people in the middle of the country tell them, in straight lines, with pauses for the parts that don't quite behave. Back when the Francis was a stop on the oilfield run, she said, Adelaine kept books for men who couldn't read receipts and kept rooms for women who didn't need to be asked why they traveled alone. She printed the audit every night, tore the strip, tucked it under the ledger ribbon, and locked the drawer. Her niece said she was proud of how long she could do the math in her headroom tax, city tax, discount for the flood man whose boots never dried. When the hotel closed in 1997, Adelaine kept a key. In 2003, she came in one last time to make the numbers even. She wrote the date, she drew a line. She put her hand to her chest like she was looking for a pen and fell as neat as folding a shirt. The firemen took 10 minutes to arrive. I put flowers on the door, and then the bank put a new lock on the door, and then time put dust on the lock and years on us all. Thalia reached out and touched the printer as if it were the hem of a dress in a department store window. Adelaine believed in drawers that closed, she said. It sounds like over again at 2:17, she gets to do that part, finish the roll, tuck it in, say goodnight to accounts. She is the kind of woman who would find that worth doing. Vesper spent Saturday building a workaround that no manager had asked for and no ghost could be fooled by. She pre-programmed a rule in the printer's network profile. At 2:16, the device would capture its own print job to a text buffer and email it to a special address she made for the Scissortail historian. Proof for people, paper for the room. At 2:15, she and Orson stood in the basement closet like two burglars having second thoughts. Orson touched the breaker switch. He looked at her. She did not nod. He did not flip it. Upstairs in 5B, the printer coughed, purred, and worked. Down here, the old gray panel vibrated, soft as sleep. At 2:20, Vesper's email pinged her phone with a single message. Subject, ledger. Body, 3 lines. Names, rates, the comp, the sign-off. Prepared by A. Merritt. Time, 2:17 amperes. M. She did not sleep that night. She didn't mind. She lay on the bed, hands behind her head, and watched the room recede from what rooms are in daylight containers, shelves, angles, and become what rooms are when you let them be churches. Limits, repetition, silence between notes. She thought about drawers, about the way her work was mostly closing things in the right order so strangers could open them and recognize what they saw, about how a hotel is a machine for forgiving you for not being home. On Sunday, she checked out. She left a thank you envelope at the desk with Quill's name written in neat engineer's block. In it, a printout of the email rule and a small drawing she'd made of the baseboard hole with an arrow labeled here, "The wire remembers." Quill held the envelope like it might be heavier than it was. Letha met her at the door. "I can't exactly put this in a maintenance request," she said, meaning the week Vesper had just spent listening to a machine be more honest than any of them owed their jobs. "But I can tell you what we can do. We can frame a copy of your email in the staff room and call it the drawer letter. We can show it to anyone who works past midnight and forgets that ending is a kindness. We cannot run a Halloween promo in 5B because some stories don't belong to customers. We cannot unplug the thing that works for someone who isn't here anymore." Vesper smiled. That's more than most places do for the living. She drove out of Tulsa with the radio off, south, then east, then north again, the planes rolling around her like a low lullaby. She stopped at a gas station where the coffee was too strong and therefore perfect. She called her brother to tell him a story with no real twist and therefore true. She didn't say the name of the printer because sometimes a tool deserves privacy. She didn't say the name of the woman who closed drawers because she had said it enough. She didn't say 2:17 because she had learned to say it in her head as a kind of vow to be kind to the people who work at that hour. Months later, back in Tulsa for a different job in a different building, she walked past the Scissortail one evening just before Christmas when the lobby held a neighbor party. A small tree wore strands of tickets in place of garland bar tabs printed for fun, red inked with dates and little notes in flare pen script. Quill waved from the desk, a Santa hat angled to keep his dignity. Letha stood by the fireplace talking to a city inspector whose expression said he had learned to sleep at last. On the stair, a woman in her 50s, adjusting an ugly sweater, looked at Vesper in that way strangers sometimes look at one another, as if they had agreed to be in the same hallway before they were born. Vesper stopped in for a minute. She drank cider from a paper cup. She left before anyone could ask for a funny story with a good ending. She slept at a chain hotel by the interstate where the printer in the lobby spat bills for bottled water and where midnight meant nothing in particular. At 2:17, she woke and smiled at the ceiling, not because any machine had called to her, but because she had trained her body to stand witness for a time that belongs to other people. She poured water into a glass and listened to the small sound it made when it met the bottom, hollow turning to full. She said the name she had been given as if returning a borrowed book. She slept again. If you ever find yourself in a hotel room and a device on the desk prints at a time that sounds like a secret, do what Vesper did. Don't yank the cord. Don't film it for the internet like proof is a currency and this is your chance to spend. Sit up, put your feet on the rug, read the names if names arrive. If you can, make a rule that gives the living something to hold a copy, a note, an email to a person whose job is to remember. Then, let the room have its paper. Let the drawer close. Say thank you to the time that isn't yours. The night staff everywhere will feel it like a hand they don't have to see. And if you must know, it goes like this. The little green light winks, the paper unfurls. The names Harlan, Odetta, Quince, Adelaine roll by, small and austere and whole. The room changes by a breath, the heater stands down, the fridge on duty hums, the typewriter in the wall or the idea of a typewriter slides one last carriage to the right and returns. The drawer locks. The ledger for that one night balances again. You will not have been asked to fix anything. You will not have been asked to believe. You will have been asked to witness. A job that counts. When dawn smears light along the window, when the city yawns and rolls, when the night auditor hands the keys back to daytime and goes home to sleep in a room with a plant that knows their voice, you will have been part of the smooth that makes this complicated world possible. Somewhere, a printer coughs once more, polite as always, and waits another 24 hours to do what it knows on the dot without apology. If, later, someone asks why a small hotel on North Boston Avenue keeps a finicky old ticket machine in a room that could rent for $2 more without it, you can say this. Not every device has to justify itself in money. Sometimes a machine is a ritual. Sometimes a ritual is a receipt that proves someone was here and did their work and went to sleep. And sometimes, at 2:17 in the morning, a woman who once locked a drawer she loved gets to do it again, which is as reasonable a reason as any you'll hear for anything that persists in this country, shaped by roads, rooms, ledgers, and the soft insistence of people who finish what they start. He found a staircase in the lake. It still goes up. He did not see the staircase until the wind laid the lake down flat, a high mountain stillness that came like a held breath. It was late afternoon on Fontana Lake in western North Carolina, where drowned hills wear water like a borrowed coat, and the concrete dam throws a cold shadow that teaches you to look twice. The drought had been long, stingy, the kind that draws shoreline back like a tide that lost faith. Ansel Rook, 39, a surveyor who liked boats better than offices, let his rented skiff idle and watched the pale slope of silt with its driftwood teeth. Then the light tipped, and a line of gray stone showed under the green, not random at all, steps as even as counted breaths, leading up from water toward nothing that should exist. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? That October, 2022, the Smokies stood sharp against a sky the color of rinsed linen. The air smelled of leaf duff and gasoline and the faraway tang of rain that was always a rumor this year and rarely a fact. Ansel had driven out from Bryson City after lunch with a paper cup of coffee and a coil of measuring tape because the county had asked for photos of exposed foundations along the North Shore. The maps they kept were honest but out of date, and the lake was telling different stories every week. He wore a windbreaker the color of old blueberries, a hat with a frayed bill, and the face of a man who does not mind being alone if the work has edges. He cut the motor and drifted. The steps began in green water a little deeper than a tall man's reach, the lake clear enough in that pocket to show the top 3 treads before light blurred into bottle glass. They continued above the surface, slick with algae at the line where water had been yesterday, then dry, then dusty, another dozen risers marching toward a slash of bank where saplings clawed at loose dirt. There was no porch, no house, no landing where a hand might reach for a knob, just a staircase that went up and then kept going as if the air were a hallway no one had told it how to be. Ansel nosed the bow toward the steps and let the skiff kiss the lowest dry riser. The hull made a hollow sound he heard in his knees. He stood, tested his balance, and stepped onto the first stone. It held. He took another. The risers were a hair shorter than modern code, built for legs from a different century. He climbed 10, then 11, then 12, a little more than a story, in a house that had learned to take weather as a sermon. He stopped where the steps met an absence and laid his hand on the sidewall that ran up either side like bones. Mortared fieldstone, careful work, the kind that starts with winter in mind. He looked back. The lake held his boat like a hand holds a toy. The dam stood off to the west, all angles and utility, its face unreadable. A loon called once far out, the syllable slanted and old. The stare made no answer, and that felt like an answer. He took out his phone. No signal, which is how stories get their chances. He knelt and ran his fingers over scrape marks in the treads where feet had once taught stone to be polite. He brushed silt from a riser with the cuff of his jacket and uncovered a line of letters someone had cut with a chisel and a spare hour. Willow Gap. The name felt right in the mouth. The steps had belonged to a place on a hillside that no longer agreed to exist. A truck rumbled on the scenic road above the tree line, then faded. Ansel stood. He is not a dramatic man, not a man who says the word haunted when the word history will do, but he felt a little movement in his scalp when his boot tried the next tread up and met nothing it could trust. He lifted his foot and set it again, and the soul found purchase on air as if stone continued in a material too stubborn for his eyes. He could feel something there, a resistance like the way a field of grass resists when you try to step through a place where deer have passed and the stems remember. He pressed. His weight held. He let it go and stepped back, heart knocking once, but not twice. He stood on the stair where real ended and whatever else began. The lake lapped below, measuring the hull against rock. A red maple leaf came down with dignity, landed on the seventh riser, and considered the long work of becoming loam. Ansel took a breath. He is a man who trusts second looks. He took one. The lake belonged to a body of stories people in Bryson City tell clean over pie. When the Tennessee Valley Authority flooded the valley to build the dam in the early 1940s, the town of Proctor had to move. Houses went down to foundations, barns left prints in the earth like giant hands, cemeteries were dug up with care and moved with ceremony, and some say not everything went where it should. On low years, people found stairs and walls, school steps, a chimney with a name carved into a cornerstone. On foolish years, people tried to steal the past, and the mud stole them instead. The county kept a list of places not to be brave. Ansel is not brave. He is patient. He walked back down to the skiff and dug out the coil of tape, a pencil, a stack of flagging ribbon. He thought of calling the park office and decided instead to take his measurements first and be useful with facts. He worked the way surveyors work, lengths and levels, muttering figures under his breath in a rhythm that kept the mind from dramatizing. He wrote Willow Gap on a page and underlined it softly with the pencil because the stone had asked. He measured tread depth, rise, total run to the bank, distance to the current water line, the angle of the bank above the last step. While he worked, a wind came from the east and pushed the surface into a skin. The steps looked less sure then. He set a small cloth bag at the foot of the first dry riser, full of pebbles and a coil of bright ribbon, because people in the mountains know that small offerings are not foolish if they help you think straight. Halfway through, he heard a bicycle bell, clear, bright, a single ring. He straightened. The sound did not belong to a road. It had the roundness of a thing sounded in an open room. He turned his head the way animals do when they want to aim an ear. The bell came again, faint, then a child's voice without words, the way children announce themselves to their own day. The air held it and gave it back. Then nothing. He called out a simple hello. The sound folded into the trees and did not return. He is not the kind of man who says names into a lake, so he went back to his numbers and let the bell be a sound that remembered and moved on. At sunset, he drove back to town. He did not mention the staircase at the diner because new stories grow better if you give them a night to decide their shape. He took his notes to the tiny desk in his rental and drew the thing. He wrote in the margin a line that was not part of any job he had ever been paid to do. The stair goes up past stone. The next morning, the lake wore a fog that fell in slow exhalations from the coves. He put the skiff in early, coffee in a thermos that had learned to keep secrets. The staircase waited. He climbed to the place where his boot had found air the day before. He lifted his foot and pressed again and met the same soft resistance, like cloth pulled tight across a doorway. The fog gathered and thinned. The lake stretched one slow muscle. He set his palm out where a banister would be if someone had considered such things. His fingers tingled with the small current that passes through the body at the exact moment a man tells himself he will try something and believes himself. He raised his knee and stepped onto what was not there. The foot held. He set the other. He stood an inch above the last stone and felt a dizzy smile crawl across his face as if he had been younger once and forgotten how to be. He took another. The air had weight where the step ought to be. He felt it through the rubber of his boot, a density that said, I am not stone and I am not stone. He climbed 3 steps in air and stopped because he is not brave. Breath is a kind of data. He took it in. The fog thinned. The stair under nothing led to a landing that the mind made, whether or not the world did. He imagined a door where the sky was, just to see if the imagination would draw a knob. It did not. He stepped back, down onto the good stone, and laughed once, quietly, pointedly, the way you tell yourself you are still a person whose days have jobs in them. On the 3rd day, he brought someone. Ansel is careful about who he invites into something he cannot name. He called Lucien Pike, 61, who ran the little historical society in town with the energy of a river in March. She wore a quilted vest and a wool cap and the kind of boots women earn by living here. She brought pastries because facts get hungry and people are nicer when their hands are busy. She listened while he told it. She did not interrupt. She asked one question with her head tilted like a dog hearing a violin. Does it go up? It goes up, he said. They went out together. The skiff felt lightly ridiculous under the weight of their care. The morning did the few small things it always does before it remembers it is in charge. The staircase was there, gray in the light, patient as a broom left leaning against a wall you forgot to keep. Lucien reached the second riser and stopped, and with an odd humility, put her palm to the wall so the stone might recognize her. She climbed to the place where air had learned a job. He watched her foot commit and hold. She gave him a look he will carry to his last morning. It had the quiet of a person who has been right about something important or wrong about something important and is making room for either result. She climbed one more and stopped. She did not push. She is not greedy. She came back down. Back in town, she made them tea in the society's office, which smelled of paper and lemon oil. She opened a ledger that had belonged to a church over the ridge that no longer stood. She turned pages until the binding sighed and laid flat, and then she tapped a finger next to a line written in a hand that had cared very much about straightness. Willow Gap Homestead, Brysonside. Stair and porch built by M. Garvey, 1931. Stepstones gifted by Applin sisters. She traced the names like a kind of blessing. People give names so the ground will keep them without bitterness, she said. Ansel told her about the bicycle bell, about the child voice that had no words. She nodded once, an economy that could hold an encyclopedia behind it. They found a photo in a folder of houses drowned to make the dam, a woman in a light summer dress halfway up a stair with a baby at her hip, and a boy of about 6 sitting on the landing with a tin pail, watching the photographer with straight seriousness. The steps were the same, the wall the same, the angle of the hillside the same, the lake not yet there to argue. Lucien tapped a pencil against the margin of the picture and said the thing that opened the room. My grandmother told me she saw the army men come to measure in 38. She said a man from Willow Gap told them he would build his stair to the sky if it meant the water would have to think twice. She said he whistled while he worked, and his boy rode a bicycle so fast it learned the curve of the road and kept taking it when the road turned into a path and the path turned into a trail and the trail turned into someone's memory of a trail. She smiled with one side of her face. I think you found where the whistling goes. That night, Ansel dreamed slow water and a boy's bell moving away just fast enough to be allowed. He woke before dawn with rain finally practicing its lines on the roof. He left the boat on the trailer and took the road along the river to the dam because seeing the thing that made the change is sometimes a cure. The dam looked itself, muscle and worry. Men in hard hats waved the way men wave when their hands are busy with ladders and they still have manners. The sky had put its gray coat back on. The rain lasted 2 full days. The third day broke open into a light that could make a shuttered room reconsider. He took the skiff out at noon. The lake had risen a hand's width and drawn a green lip on the lower steps. He climbed again. The air steps remained, not drowned by a little more water, not meek. He stood on the third invisible tread and spoke toward the place where a door might be. Not loudly, not foolishly. Hello, he said. Then, because the air had made him braver than he ought to be, he added, I can bring your names back to where people can see them. The lake answered the way lakes answer, by being present with everything around them without offering comment. He sat on the fourth stone step and ate the pastry Lucienne had tucked into his pocket as if she had known he would forget to eat. He tried the air with his palm again and felt, for just a fraction of heart rhythm, a shape moved across it that was not his hand at all. The story traveled the way stories travel when they are useful. Not online, not yet. In town, over paper cups, in line at the post office, at the walk-in barber with the fish calendar 3 years behind. People gave him their versions. A woman who remembered a man who remembered seeing a parade of porches floating like rafts past the bend when the first flood came. An old man with a face like a woodcut who said he used to fish off a stone stair when his father was alive, and that if you whistled the tune that man used, you could make the bobber nod. A teacher who had kept a box of rail spikes and marbles found on low years and said she would clean them and bring them by the society office so Lucienne could have them or pretend not to want them like she always did. In late October, with 2 hard frosts behind them, the county asked Ansel to guide a ranger and a structural engineer to the site. They went out in a John boat that carried its own echo. The ranger was a woman named Haynes who wore the park's green like a promise and carried the weight of a radio the way people carry their father's ideas. The engineer was a man with a gentle way of touching old things before speaking ill of them. They stood on the 5th stone step and looked up the ladder of air and did not mock it. The ranger wrote in a book. The engineer crouched and set a level on the 2nd tread and laughed once softly when the bubble centered itself as if the past knew about precision. Haynes asked the question, stories have to survive. Is it dangerous? Ansel shrugged in a way that held 3 chapters. It is dangerous the way memory is dangerous, he said. It makes people want to keep climbing. It is dangerous the way stairs are when you forget you have a body with limits. It is not dangerous the way an alligator is, or a bar fight. They set 3 stakes in the bank and tied flagging ribbon between, a line that told people who had to approach that someone else had been wise before them. Haynes asked for a sign, the simple kind that reads caution and does not attempt poetry. Ansel offered to come and keep an eye some afternoons when he had work nearby. She wrote his cell number in her book and tucked the pencil behind her ear in a way his mother would have liked. In early November, a fog rolled in low and forgot to leave. The lake became a page erased and written over, erased again. School buses turned their lights on at noon. The mountain that wears the dam as a decoration hid its fine line. Ansel kept away because the fog makes men do things they forgive themselves for later, and a man ought to reduce his opportunities for forgiveness if he can. On the first clear morning after, he went out early and found 2 objects on the 4th stone step that could not have gotten there by falling. A bicycle bell, rusted but round, the striker frozen in a kind of kindness, and a tin pail, the exact wrong size for anything useful, dented where a boy might have clapped it to make the sound bigger. He touched neither. He sat down. He greeted them with his breath in line, the way you greet animals that have decided to be near you. At 10, Lucienne arrived with a thermos and 2 paper cups and the sort of force field that keeps good men from doing dumb things for no reason. She looked at the bell and the pail and did not pretend not to see them. She took photos that did not flatter the light and said the names in the ledger once: Lowe, Garvey, Applin, Willow Gap. She did not say a boy, she did not say a child. She put her hand on the sidewall and looked up the line of air with the plain candor of someone who has shored up more shelves than emotions and understands both. You can coax a story, she said, but not yank it. Take the bell to town. Leave the pail here for another day. We will see what the lake thinks of compromise. He took the bell gently, wrapped it in a handkerchief he had never found much use for before, and pocketed it like a chosen stone. Back at the office, Lucien set it next to a photograph and a typed card. Bicycle bell recovered from Willow Gap Stair, fall of 22, likely pre-flood artifact. On the card, a second line in pencil for people who read too fast. The stair goes up. In the second week of December, with the mountains blue as a bruise and the wind deciding to be cruel to make up for lost time, Ansel went out one last day before the holidays. He brought a crowbar because he had promised himself he would not bring a crowbar until the story invited one. He did not need it. The pail had sat, then vanished, then returned, then sat again with a rock in it a little smaller than a fist. He took the rock out and saw in the bottom of the pail, scratched by some patient hand or the work of a nail held at an angle, 3 words: Open in summer. He laughed out loud then. So loudly, a pair of ducks took off in a panic and told other ducks about him for an hour. He looked up at the sky, which had forgotten him to tend to larger business. He put the pail back on the step. He told it, with what dignity he could muster, that he would. Winter happened the way winter happens down there. One day, the lake wore a shell of rime like a dare. The next day, it rained hard as coins. Ansel worked a road job in the next county and came home tired to soup and a radio with the news that would not stop wishing it were better. He sent Lucien postcards from 2 counties over with sketches of culverts no one needed, and she mailed him back photocopies of ledger pages with red pencil underlines that made more sense than his own arrows. By late June, the water had climbed enough to lick at the 3rd riser and cover the 1st. The air above the invisible steps still felt like fabric pulled tight by a careful hand. School let out, and visitors came with coolers and the need to float and forget. Haynes put the sign back up twice. Ansel sat on the 8th stone step more than once and told people kindly that there was nothing up there for them unless they had time to spare and patience to listen. A few listened, most did not. No one fell, which felt like a policy. On a hot Monday, when thunderheads built tall and polite to the south and forgot to arrive, he took the pail and set it in his lap and used the crowbar not as a pry, but as a weight. He eased the thin tin sides apart where they had been pinched back over the lip like a secret. Inside, he found folded oilcloth, soft as a worn glove. Inside that, a photograph no larger than his palm, and a strip of paper with a line that looked like a prayer until he read it, and it felt like a list. The photograph showed the stair as it had been before the lake, the woman in summer dress and the baby at her hip, and the boy with the pail, sitting with a seriousness that has no word in English. The man who must be M. Garvey stood 2 steps down, hat in hand, as if introducing the stairs to whoever had the camera. Behind them, the ridge wore its trees in a confidence the mountains teach. On the back, in careful letters, someone had written, "So you remember how we looked when the water was a rumor." The strip of paper held one long sentence. When they came with clipboards, he whistled the tune about willow leaves and said he'd build the stair to the sky because steps are a kind of truth, and the water would have to climb over the truth if it wanted to drown the house. There were names then, 3, the kind that drop out of families and get picked up by strangers who treat them right. He folded the strip back into the oilcloth and put all of it into the pail and set it on the step, because the story belonged to the stair more than it belonged to him. In August, a lightning storm chewed on the dam and left it as it had found it. In September, a girl with a blue braid and a polka dot dress climbed the real stone steps and stood at the place where air did its work and played a penny whistle softly, 3 notes, and then a run. Her grandmother sat on the 2nd step and wiped her cheeks with a tissue she pretended was for sweat. Lucienne watched from the bank with a composure she had purchased fairly over years of deciding when to speak and when to file. Haynes wrote a note in her book that read in an unsentimental hand, "Leave space here." The last time Ansel went before the rains came back for real, he climbed onto the third invisible tread and set his palm out at the height of a child's head. He did not feel breath. He felt pressure. A small, exact pressure, like the world, confirming a measurement you would have sworn was off by just enough to drive you mad. He closed his eyes and saw the boy on the landing with the pail and the bell. He saw a woman take the last two steps at a practical pace, baby on hip. He saw a man look out at a hillside that had just become a lake and refuse to let the stair be anything but stairs. He opened his eyes, and the lake went on being a lake. There is not a larger lesson he can give you from this, except the one he wrote in the margin of his notebook after the second week, a sentence he did not quite understand then and understands in the small of his back now. Not everything drowned. Some things learn to keep their shape in the air and wait for your foot. If you go to Fontana when the water is down and the wind minds its manners, you can find the stair if you ask the right person and you promise not to hurry. It will be there the way durable things are there, honest about their age, unwilling to entertain your stunts. You can put your boot on the third step and feel something that does not owe you an explanation hold you anyway. You can look up at the sky and decide there is a door or decide there isn't, and the stair will permit either decision. You can listen for a bicycle bell and you may hear a loon instead, and that will be enough. If you tell the story afterward, tell it the way lakes prefer, with pauses, with dates spoken out loud so the years remember they are not just numbers, with names because names weigh the right things down. Say Willow Gap, say Garvey, say Applin, say a boy, though the paper does not give him to you. Say a woman moving with a baby on her hip and a list in her head and a refusal to shame the stairs with panic. Say a man who whistled a leaf tune and believed in steps the way people believe in scripture, not as decoration, but as an instruction on how to move the body when the body wants to quit. And if you find yourself on a day when the wind drops and the water stills, and you are offered the choice to test a step that does not belong to stone, ask your breath first. Make it even. Set your palm where a rail would be. Put your weight down like a promise. If it holds, climb one and stop. The air prefers people who do not need to conquer it to feel tall. Leave something small on the fifth step. A ribbon, a marble, a bell that waited in a drawer too long. Walk back down and let the day close the drawer. The stair will keep going up whether you are there to witness the miracle of plain persistence or not. That is how some things survive the flood. They decide to be their own house. They decide to be the part of the house you cannot drown. The 911 call that kept connecting after the funeral. They buried the phone with him because his mother asked them to. It had been his tool and his diary, the way people keep their whole lives in their pocket now. And in the week between the collision and the service, she said quietly at the kitchen table that she wanted him to have it. The funeral was on a brisk Thursday in late March in a small town along the Skagit River in Washington state, the kind of day that smells like thawed earth and rain on cedar. 2 days later, at 2:18 in the morning, the county's emergency line lit up with his number and the call connected as cleanly as if he were standing outside the dispatch center with a brand new signal. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Keely March was the dispatcher on the board that night. 36. A decade of night shifts wrapped around her bones like a habit she didn't try to quit. She knew the sound of every ringtone the county used, and 3 it no longer trusted. She had trained herself to keep breath even if a voice said, "There is a gun," or the faraway way people say, "I think I'm dying." She kept a knitted cardigan on the back of her chair and 2 photos on the shelf above the console. Her mother standing in front of Diablo Lake with her hair trying to fly away, and a Polaroid of a skinny boy with a chipped front tooth and a smile that looked like a dare. The boy was her younger brother, Finn, 28 in the photo, forever 28 by the time the town paper ran his name above the fold. The collision had been a week before spring turned a corner. Late at a 4-way stop out by the county line, an empty log truck rolling too fast through a fog that made taillights smear into red ribbons. Finn drove a dented Civic with a cracked dashboard and an air freshener shaped like a salmon that had long since given up its scent. He worked night stocking feed at the co-op and mornings on his old guitar, composing pieces called things like Wet Pavement and The First Chanterelle. When the deputy knocked on Keeley's door just after dawn that Friday, the word sister felt like a ladder that someone had kicked away. They buried him with the phone on a Tuesday afternoon because the ground needed a day after the last hard freeze. Keeley held the thing in her palm before they closed the lid. Old, black, the screen spidered, and the case pocked with drops of white paint from the time they redid the kitchen. She turned it face down, as if giving it privacy inside that last small room, and she did not cry in that second. She saved the crying for the night in her car outside the Safeway lot when the radio played a song he used to send her links to, saying, "Listen to the way the kick drum makes the air behave." So when the board flashed with his number at 2:18 in the morning, when the screen read Finn March Mobile, when the console showed the tower on the hill by bird's view, grabbing his call like a father grabs a child's hand crossing a street, there was a half second where Keeley didn't breathe at all. Then she did exactly what training says. She pressed the line open, put her voice in the place it knows, and said calmly, 911, what is your emergency? Silence, which is not always empty. The air bedded itself in her ear. She heard distance, a kind of wet rush the river makes when it is thinking about snowmelt. Under that, a click like someone setting a mug on tile. Her eyes went to the automatic location information and found nothing helpful. The software threw up a circle that could have been half the county. The handset beeped as if someone on the other end had put a thumb over the microphone and removed it. Then a sound arrived that she did not mistake, a short, soft, breathy laugh. The exact one a brother makes when he cannot help but find something funny, even in a room where the air belongs to grief. Keeley's free hand had already found the little rosary of buttons around enter that she wore down with steady use. Her thumb wanted the panic of someone else. She kept it from that. She tried again. Can you talk to me? If you can't talk, tap once for yes, twice for no. If you are hurt, I need you to stay on the line. We are here with you. A small sound like wind through fur limbs rode the connection, then static, thin as a hair. The call timer hit 19 seconds, 21, 27. She probed the network with a key command. The number at the top of the screen did not lie, it was his. She sent a ping. The triangle on her map twitched half an inch and then flattened, embarrassed to have moved. The night supervisor, a stout woman named MrBall, who kept cough drops in a coffee mug painted with trout, wheeled her chair closer without rolling over Keeley's headset cord. You good. It's his, Keeley said, and felt foolish because the board already told them both. She tapped a line into the event note, caller number displays as deceased subject. Open line, faint audio, possible misdeal from unknown handset, possible pocket dial from transferred number, because the systems need this kind of vocabulary even when the body wants to type a prayer. The line stayed. The river sound rose and fell with the patience of a thing that had been working since the first melt in these hills. Twice the click. At 42 seconds, a voice so faint that her headphones might have invented it if she hadn't known the exact way it shaped vowels. A whisper before the word, the way he did when he wanted to speak quietly but his breath didn't know the trick yet. Key, he said. Then static erased whatever came next. She did what you do. You keep the line alive and you start the search without pretending you can command the search's heart. She thumbed a hot button that rang the on-call deputy cruising past Lyman. She opened the text box to the Fire District volunteers and wrote a plain message. Open line 911 from cell belonging to Finn March. Please stage at South Skagit Highway and mile marker 12. Listen for any audible cues. She sent it. She kept her voice in that pocket where calm is a bridge other people can cross. If you can hear me, Finn, give me anything, tap, breath, song, whatever you want. I'm here. I've got you. At 1 minute and 9 seconds, the line disconnected itself with the flat little goodbye that handsets make when they are tired of holding grief. MrBall squeezed Keeley's shoulder. Not hard, just where the muscle under the blade flinches when you ask it to admit it's a muscle. Phones glitch, she said. The way you say a thing because you care about the person you are saying it to, not because the sentence is enough. It might be a number that got reassigned too fast, or a voicemail we don't understand, or the system hiccuping. Eat your granola bar, drink your water. Keely nodded. She typed. She called the carrier and reached a support tech whose voice was young and far away and trying very hard to be the right kind of helpful. He put her on hold while he consulted screens and a script. He came back with words that felt like pebbles. The phone was deactivated the day after the funeral. The SIM wasn't live. The number was in a 30-day limbo before being returned to the pool. No activity on the account, no pings, no nothings. He suggested, gently, that older consoles misreport. She thanked him with the flat politeness you give a person who has done their job thoroughly and still left you in the same room. At 3:31, the line lit again. Same number, same tower, same ring that used to show up when he called from outside the co-op in the rain. She connected. This time, the wind sound was larger, the way a body learns to be a room for weather. She said his name. She said her name, because sometimes that helps even with the living. The whisper arrived again, under a breath that made her think of the cold. Key, he said. Key. What key? Love. Tell me where you are. She could hear MrBall pinging the deputy, already turning him around toward the bridge at Minkler. She messaged the volunteer fire chief, a man named Boone, with a mustache that looked like the map of a meandering creek, and he replied with a thumbs up and the single word rolling, because that is how nights with radios and riverbanks work. The whisper came a third time. Key, box. Then the line shook itself off like a dog and was gone. At dawn, she drove home the long way, because the short way had too many pieces of memory stuck to it. She slept hard for 90 minutes and woke with the imprint of her headset still on her left ear. She showered and went to her mother's, sat at the table with the fruit bowl and the envelope full of sympathy cards that needed more than thanks in reply. She kept the thing she needed to say in her teeth while her mother talked about potato salad and what to do with the clothes in his room. Then she let it out. Simple. His number called. Last night. Twice. I answered. Her mother's hand did that small pat-pat that says, I hear the pain, but I do not believe the sentence. It's grief, she whispered. It changes the way machines sound. Keely nodded, because there was nothing else to do with that sentence but nod back and put it in a pocket for later. That night, Keely traded shifts so she could be back on at midnight, the board under her hands like a piano that belonged to the county. At 2:16, she said quietly to the room with no one in it but her, don't. And at 2:18, the line lit anyway. The event timer clicked into its 1 to 2 rhythm. She opened the call. The whisper came faster. Key, box, tread. She wrote the words down in block letters out of a reflex that felt like morality. She pushed her chair back an inch. Tread, she said, like stairs, like a step. A new sound crept in around the edge of the river. A hollow drum, regular, light. Keely closed her eyes. She knew that sound. Years of middle-of-the-night responses to houses with basements and water where it didn't belong. Sump pump, she said out loud, not to the caller, not to the room, just to the fact of sound. She typed, sump, pump, hum. Then another word arrived under the hum, not from the line, but from inside her own head, wearing the voice of the skinny boy in the Polaroid. Take the old key from the coffee can, sis, the one with the brass coin stuck to it. Box under the stair, third tread up, like we did when the lights went out in storms. She stood before she meant to. MrBall watched her, didn't stop her. Keely put the call on a hold that wasn't a hold and told Boone to swing a truck by her mother's house. She called her mother from the desk that sees everything. Don't be afraid, she said. I'm sending the volunteers to check the basement. Just wait for them. Don't go down alone. Her mother didn't ask why, which is one thing grief teaches. People you love get to make requests without explanation for a while. Boone's rig rolled up with its lights quiet. The volunteers went headfirst into that smell. Every Northwest basement owns bleach and wet and the memory of potatoes stored during years when the family didn't trust the store. Keely stayed on the line with the open nothing, her voice splinted into calm by a profession that forbids hysteria. The pump clicked. The whisper breathed once more and said a word she wasn't ready for. Sorry. Then, softly, don't be mad. Boone's voice arrived on the radio like a chair scraping back. Found it, he said, under the third tread. You want me to read you the note, or you want me to bring it to you? Read, she said, because whatever was going to happen to her lungs if she waited wasn't worth the poetry of paper in hand. Boone read slow, the way you read a recipe from a grandmother's hand. It's written on the back of a co-op receipt. It says, key tape to this in case. Safe deposit at Skagit State. There's a note inside for Key. Don't tell Mom what bank it is because she'll go without you. Tell her to wait. Also, okay, sorry about the dent in your bumper. That last part's got a smile face drawn like a potato. Something in Keely that had been standing on one leg for a week put its foot down. She let out a laugh that wasn't a laugh and wasn't anything else her mother would have recognized over the old landline if she'd been listening. She wrote the words down because the act made them legally alive. The line in her ear hissed a little, as if pleased. Then it went quiet. Morning brought a restless sun and the sort of legal tasks people think the dead should have trained us for. She drove her mother to the bank with the safe deposit vault and the ancient pen on a chain. She presented the letter that the funeral director had told her to keep in her purse. They signed a paper. They went into the room with the little booths. The banker slid the box out and put it down like a ceremony. Inside was a small green notebook with his handwriting, which had always leaned like a boy sitting cross-legged on a sidewalk. For Keely, it said on the first page. Next to it, a business envelope with her mother's name. There was a key on a ring shaped like a mountain that belonged to the old Subaru they used to share, and a folded paper that turned out to be a draft of a song he would never record because the bridge wouldn't come no matter how he tricked it. There was also a receipt for a storage unit in town that she'd asked him about once, and he'd shrugged and said tools while his eyes looked at a point behind her shoulder. He had written her a letter that began with two jokes whose laughter had expired and then got to the part that made her lever open a whole new drawer in herself. I know you'll be the one who makes sense of this stuff if anything happens, he wrote. I know I'm not supposed to say if anything happens like I can see it, but I think about it when I'm out by mile 12 in fog and the log trucks don't think they need me to exist. He told her where to find things and how to say certain facts to their mother in a sequence that would hurt less. He wrote a sentence that came from the middle of his lungs. Don't carry what isn't yours. He signed his name so fast, the last letter looked like a dog's tail. She held the little book while her mother read her envelope. Her mother's face did a new thing, an arrangement Keely hadn't known it could do. She realized, not for the first time, that grief makes a gallery of your expressions, and you have to decide which ones are worth hanging. That night, Keely took herself off the schedule, even though the county hates it when you do that with no notice. She made tea the way their grandmother did, steeped until the spoon stood up if you let it. She sat at the kitchen table with Finn's notebook and a pencil for the words she needed to lay next to his. She wrote the dates like you have to say them out loud, late March, 2021, because numbers felt like bad company. She made a list because doing is a language the body trusts. At 2:18, the phone on the wall rang, the old landline they had kept for storms because cell service sulks here when the rain gets personal. She lifted it with the same hand she used to place IVs when she thought she'd be a nurse. She said hello the way you say hello into a hotel room when you think someone might be in the shower, polite and ready to apologize. Open line, said the part of her that had trained for too long to rest, but it wasn't the emergency board. It was her mother's cousin from Bellingham, voice carrying prayer under its vowels. Keely felt the absurd laugh again and let it go this time. Not tonight, she thought to the air where a river sometimes lived. The calls went quiet for 3 nights after that. She dreamed the sump pump clonked in a steady heartbeat and that the water rose anyway, inching up the metal pole of the washer like it had a plan. She woke with her mouth dry and her eyes open, the way a serviceable person wakes when she has decided she will not let the day surprise her anymore. On the 4th night, the board lit at 1:10, not 2:18. Same number, same tower, same little pang like someone pulling 3 hairs from the back of her neck in the exact way a brother does when he wants you to feel a thing without associating the pain with him. She answered, now less afraid of the fact and more afraid of the day when the board would decide to stop being strange. This time, it wasn't the river. This time, a sound like tires on aggregate eased into her ear. She heard a blinker make an unnecessary music. She heard a rumble her body recognized as the mile-long freight that climbs the grade toward concrete and can be heard everywhere when clouds lay a lid over the valley. She said his name. The whisper didn't come. Instead, a voice she didn't know. Exhausted in that way, dispatchers measure with a ruler, not with pity. "Ma'am," the voice said, "are you the lady on the other end of this number? This thing called me and it went straight to your board." Keely did a fast thing with her hands that told the recorder to make a second copy. She said her name and her role. The man explained in the way tired men always do, with extra details they do not know are extra. He was a rail worker out past Birdsview, night shift, walking the line with a vest and a can of paint, and a patience that came from a man who had watched 3 friends leave town for no good reason. A phone lying by the ballast lit up bright white as a trout belly and slid a call to 911 before he could decide how to feel. He picked it up because of course he did. He saw the screen read Finn March because whoever the system was had a sense of humor. "Where exactly are you, sir?" she asked. And he told her the truth, the way only people at 2 in the morning tell you truths. Mile marker 11, point something, run outside of the line, by the old alder that looks like a witch if you give her a hat. She sent Boone with 2 men and headlamps and the desire to leave without needing to talk to anyone. They found the phone in a seam of gravel, half covered by ash from last summer's burn. No SIM, no battery, a thing not alive, and still somehow doing the work a thing does when asked correctly. The railman said he had watched a martin cross the tracks with the authority of a bishop, and that the phone had lit at his feet with no reason. Boone brought it back in an evidence bag, as if that would matter to anyone who keeps a room of labeled bags. Keely set the dead phone on the console like a votive. She stared at it 4 minutes and 40 seconds, and then turned it face down the way she had in the chapel with the roses and the smell of lilies that always go too far. She spoke into the radio to tell the volunteers to go home. She put a note in the event record that read in plain human, "Found object belonging to decedent, recovered at tracks near mile 11, turned over to family." The calls didn't stop. They thinned. They arrived on days when the river wore fog like a borrowed coat. They brought her directions she did not always want. It called once when she and her mother were at the storage unit with the overhead door that rolled like a prayer. "Box on the right," said the whisper after the open line, and the pump hum and the small laugh had passed. Not the one with Christmas lights, other right. The box held the watch their grandfather had worn in the war, and 2 rolls of quarters, and the letter that finished a fight their mother had been carrying with a girl from high school for 30 years, without admitting it was heavy. It called once more on an evening in late July, the kind of hot, rare to that valley, when heat lies down like a dog everywhere and pants. She was off duty for once, drinking water in long draws with a slice of lime she did not deserve. The board would be in someone else's ear. Still, she felt it. The old wall phone rang, she lifted it. Nothing. Then the faintest corridor of sound, the way a tin can telephone sounds when the string is too long. She stood very still in her kitchen, in a house that still carries their father's shadow even after 2 decades, and she listened. No river, no pump. Someone whistled 3 notes she hadn't heard since they were kids on a porch with a bowl of cherries and sticky hands. The notes meant, "Come in, it's time." Then the line went as tenderly empty as it had ever been. People ask her sometimes when they find out what happens on the night board, whether she believes in ghosts. She says no in the way a person says no to a question that tries to make a movie out of a documentary. She believes in the way the valley holds sound and the way water teaches machines new tricks. She believes in the habits of grief, which include calling you at unreasonable hours and asking you to find objects on shelves you didn't label. She believes in the way certain names carry weight in certain counties and in the way good men hide keys in obvious places because they want the right person to find them without feeling tricked. If you listen for a moral here, you will miss the point and the point will not be angry. It will go on being a point without you. Keely goes to work, she works. She keeps the cardigan on her chair and the photos on the shelf. She answers calls from people who are alive in the cracked ways the living are alive, and she sends help, and sometimes the help is in time, and sometimes it is in time to witness the end of something. She eats her granola bar. She drinks her water. She drives home the long way if the short way tells a story too loudly. She keeps the dead phone in a drawer that sticks a little on humid days. She tells the story to exactly the right number of people and then stops. Some nights, the board does the old trick and shows a number the carrier cannot account for, and a tower that should be asleep, and a location shaped like a shrug. She answers. She says the words she has said more than any words she will ever say. 911. What is your emergency? If all that comes back is a river being a river, she lets the line stay until it learns how to disconnect. If a whisper says key or box or sorry, she says the truth in the voice that has led more people back to themselves than the county will ever know. I've got you. We'll figure it out. When she passes the graveyard on her way to the early shift now and then, she rolls the window down and checks whether the air smells like cut grass and stone or like lilies someone should have watered more recently. She does not say his name out loud there because she knows better. She says it in the car when the freight rolls through the valley and makes the whole county feel like a chest resonating under a singer's hand. She says it in the basement when the pump kicks on and the house remembers last winter. She says it when her mother takes a nap in a chair with sunlight that has fallen asleep with her. And sometimes, when the hills fold the night just right and the board glows a color she cannot forget, the call connects after midnight and after the end of a song and after the last note of a life that learned to close drawers. It connects after the funeral and after the casseroles and after the number has technically stopped being anyone's. The call connects, and a river breathes, and a laugh leans into the wire, and a word that matters knows the way to the one person who will stand still long enough to hear it and then do something small and exact with what she has heard. That is enough. That is all anyone should demand from a story that features a phone and a county and a woman who is good at being awake when most of the world is asleep and at letting go when it is time to let the line go. So, if your phone rings with a number you are certain belongs to someone who has been given over to the ground, do not panic, do not make a shrine, do not go on television. Answer, stand still. Say your name, ask for what it wants. If the only answer is a sound you know, river, pump, train, the kitchen clock arguing with the refrigerator, write down the words anyway. They will lead you to a key you were meant to find, a box you were meant to open, a third tread meant to lift. And when the line empties itself politely, as lines do, put the phone back on its hook and walk the long way to bed. Somewhere far off, a dispatcher you will never meet is saying the same sentence you just said, in the tone that holds a county steady. I've got you. We will figure it out. Then, a light goes dark. The river keeps the beat, the valley sleeps, and doesn't, and goes on.